Kissimmee when the alligator attack happened. The caller initially told the operator that 2 people had been attacked by the alligator, but later said that only a woman had been bitten and that the alligator actually took a life jacket from another man who was in the group. While he was on the phone, he said that that gator could still be playing with that life jacket. It took rescuers about 45 minutes to get to the group of kayakers because they were out in a canal that was surrounded by marsh. It was also kind of challenging to find the kayakers, their group's exact location, and the operator was explaining to the caller how he could drop a pin and send it to first responders. During the call, you can hear the operator explaining that the group needed to use a clean, dry towel or a bandage to create a tourniquet for the woman to prevent her from bleeding out. However, the caller told the operator that the woman would start screaming in pain when they tried to move her arm to try to bandage it. About 30 minutes into the call, he explained that the woman's bleeding had gone down. However, she was getting weaker by the minute, and he also said that her pulse had dropped to about 64. Let's listen to some of that call.
We had 2 people go in the water, and they're trying to pump the boat out. The other guy wasn't hurt. I thought he was hurt, but the alligator just ripped his life jacket off him. So he's trying to get his boat out, and then we have like 20 other people that are in the group, and we're trying to get them out of the way.
So there's 20 people in all in your group, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, but nobody is on, no patients are on the water, in the boat.
Right, there's only one patient. And the alligator's moving towards you. Why don't you move? Move away from get away from the light vest. I've never seen anything like this. Yeah, they're on their way. They're trying to get them an exact location, so I'm hoping that they can pin my phone. Yeah, I'm sure they're coming by boat.
Okay, yeah, just make sure there's no people or patients in any boat on the water, okay?
No, the patient is like half in and half out of the water. He's actually, what do you want? I'm sorry.
Okay, so are we able to get her completely out of the water?
Not without her yelling at us. So her feet are in the water.
And about 35 minutes into that 911 call, the caller said that he could see and hear a helicopter circling overhead, so that they had one of the members of the kayaking group hold up a paddle so that the rescuers in that helicopter could see them. That helicopter did land, and the crew on board was able to get on an airboat and reach those kayakers. Again, that woman, she was bitten in the elbow and taken to an area hospital, but at this point we don't have any word on what condition she's in or how much blood she may have lost. Now, the FWC said that they have contacted a contracted nuisance alligator trapper, has been called out to remove the alligator. They also stressed that alligator attacks are rare, and they do recommend keeping a safe distance away from those reptiles. The FWC also recommends keeping pets away from the water's edge, swimming only in designated swimming areas during the daylight hours, and the FWC stresses that it is important to never feed an alligator. Now, anybody who is concerned about a nuisance alligator is asked to call the Nuisance Alligator Hotline. That number is 866-FWC-GATOR. And once you call that hotline, a contracted nuisance alligator trapper will come out to investigate. Garrett?
A scary situation there. I can only imagine. And you know, hearing that 911 call, you know, it sounds like there were a lot of people there, and certainly glad that they were able to help in those immediate moments. But some good things to keep in mind there, of course, when it comes to being around alligators. Now, also today. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yeah, you know, when you listen to that 911 call, it can be terrifying because, again, it did take 45 minutes for rescuers to reach that group of kayakers simply because they were pretty much out in the middle of nowhere surrounded by marsh. So it did make it difficult to reach them.
Yeah. Also, opening statements today for a Manatee County woman who is in a trial now, faced with some charges in a deadly hit-and-run crash.
Yes, that's right. Opening statements began today in what's being known as the Peace Walker trial. Prosecutors say Teresa Zeppi hit 82-year-old Joey Dralis with her Lincoln Navigator while he was walking through a Bradenton neighborhood back in 2020. Dralis later died from his injuries. He was known as the Peace Walker because he would greet each passerby with a smile and a peace sign during his daily walks. This morning, prosecutors said that Zeppi hit Dralis, left him on the side of the road, and didn't stop. Investigators said that she did eventually pull over about 500 feet down the road to check on her Lincoln Navigator to see if it had any damage, and then she drove away. The state believes she knew exactly what happened before she drove away. However, her defense attorney says that she was an offender bender earlier that same day and was concerned about damage to her front bumper, and that may be why she stopped to check her vehicle. Now, again, this accident happened in 2020. Zeppi was not arrested until 2022. She was charged with leaving the scene of a crash with death and tampering with evidence. She did bond out of jail that same day she was arrested. Now, Teresa Zeppi is now 60 years old, and she was supposed to take a plea deal that would have put her on house arrest for about 2 years, but that offer was revoked last week. Dralis' family told Fox 13 that they considered the plea deal a miscarriage of justice. In June of 2023, Zeppi was actually involved in another crash and had her license revoked. Now, this trial is expected to wrap up later this week. Garrett?
Elsewhere in the area, another woman arrested in a deadly hit-and-run crash as well.
Yeah, this time a 73-year-old woman has been arrested for a deadly hit-and-run crash last month in Sarasota that killed a 2-year-old and killed a 5-month-old and also critically injured those children's mother. June Fenton was arrested last night and charged with 2 counts of leaving the scene of a crash that resulted in a fatality and 1 count of leaving the scene of a crash that resulted in serious injury. Police say that the mother of those 2 children was hit while she was pushing a stroller with those kids around 8:30 on February 10th. Investigators said that the mother and children were not at a crosswalk and that the driver who hit them, who has been identified as Fenton, did not stop to call 911 or render aid. Now, shortly after the crash, police said that they found the vehicle that they believed was involved, and they said that the driver was cooperating with the investigation. However, it did take time to collect evidence and make sure that that was in fact the car, and that they do believe that Fenton was driving that vehicle. Now, last night, the Sarasota Police Department also thanked their community for their patience because it did take a while to make an arrest in this deadly hit-and-run case. Garrett?
All right, Fox 13's Nancy Gay. We appreciate you joining us with our Tampa Connection today.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back into Florida Live on this day one of the legislative session in Tallahassee. It means a pretty busy day at the state capitol, and also a lot to talk about when it comes to state politics. And so we are going to go ahead and bring in Kimberly Leonard, a Politico reporter and the author of Florida Playbook that you can get delivered to your email inbox every morning. And Kimberly, we always appreciate you joining us on Tuesdays here on Florida Live.
Yeah, happy to.
So let's start with the governor's State of the State address today, where he kind of outlining, laying out his vision, his priorities, and a lot of this we have heard before. What were your takeaways from the governor's address this morning?
Yeah, it was interesting because Florida has already become a lot more conservative under Governor DeSantis's leadership. And so there wasn't really as much of kind of what some might call, red meat topics to make the state more conservative. It feels like he already kind of touched on all of that, but he did appear to have a very big recognition of how expensive it has become to live in Florida. He really pushed to do more with property insurance. He pushed the legislature to do something he's asked to do for months, which is look at some of these condo reform laws that have caused some people to have to sell their properties and then not be able to find anything comparable. And he also talked about property taxes. He wants to abolish those completely. There's obviously some skepticism around that, but everyone is pretty gung-ho about it and saying, they think it's a great idea. Everyone loves paying less in taxes, but the taxes, of course, do pay for things like teacher pay and schools and libraries and public safety, firefighters, and so forth. So he doesn't have an explanation about how they'll replace it yet, but it just, to me, sort of showed that was the biggest takeaway in tuning in, that this was a speech really focused on how do we make Florida even more affordable, because in recent years, it's just become so much less so.
And so are these things that we expect the legislature to prioritize in this session?
Well, there is some I would say back and forth about the condo issue specifically, because the legislature is very worried about safety. They, after the Surfside partial building collapse where dozens of people died, it was a horrific accident. There is concern that, another issue like that might happen again. And, there's still no study about what the exact issue was behind the Surfside collapse, but the main reason they passed all these regulations was to help spot these issues to begin with, and to make sure that condos would build up reserves so that they could pay for fixes over time and that this wouldn't happen again. However, it's also created a huge issue in terms of developers that want to come in and just take over. And so Governor DeSantis today said, look, we just need some sort of flexibility to look at this. People shouldn't have to be driven out of their homes. So I would say that's going to be the stickiest one for it to get changed.
I want to also ask a little bit about the 2026 gubernatorial race, because Politico's had some interesting reporting on this in the past few days about Casey DeSantis, kind of what she has been saying about this, and also what some Florida insiders that I know y'all have been talking to are saying about the state of the governor's race as well.
Yeah, well, the Florida First Lady has done nothing to tamp down the speculation. She's definitely thinking about it. And look, this comes as no surprise, really, to those of us who've been reporting on Florida politics for a while. I've had people tell me for years to expect this. It's only recently that DeSantis's inner circle is acknowledging that this, in fact, is on the table. And of course, the First Lady, she gave a very coy response about it when asked last week. Look, she would be a formidable opponent to anyone. Right now, the only candidate is Byron Donalds, who is a congressman who has Trump's endorsement, which is a very powerful endorsement and probably might mean the race is over. But that doesn't mean that, there might not be other entrants. But it would be seen as a pretty big betrayal by a lot of those in Trump world, especially since DeSantis already tried to go up against Trump, in the presidential nominating contest and lost to him in Iowa and then shortly dropped out. But she's very well known just because she's been very involved. And what was interesting today, and something I urged our playbook readers to watch, is I said, watch for any comments he makes about the First Lady or any types of acknowledgement of her programs or giving her a big policy win. And he did, in fact, do that. So it's certainly something they're thinking about. I don't know ultimately if they end up doing it. They may decide that it's too much of a risk. There are people who say that if they do this and lose, that is the end of a 2028 race for Governor DeSantis to try to run for president again. And so I would say that it all depends on the stakes, and it all depends on how Byron Donalds does. But he is beloved in Trump world. He has been an ally for years, and so he'll be very difficult to beat because he has the president's backing.
But the DeSantises, I know Politico has reported, were also spotted at breakfast with Trump over the weekend.
Yeah. Well, that was first reported by the Wall Street Journal, a former Politico alum, though. But yes, they had breakfast, and they talked about this. My understanding is that they're hoping that there might be room down the line, maybe a double endorsement, as NBC News just reported. Trump has done that before, right? Where he's had a double endorsement so that he doesn't lose, basically. I don't know if they can get that. Trump has not just been talking up Byron Donalds beginning a couple weeks ago with the endorsement. He's been talking up Byron Donalds for months. I mean, I would get messages from donors who said, hey, he pulled Byron Donalds aside and said, oh, I heard you're going to be governor of Florida, in front of people. And so it sounds to me like he's pretty committed to his first choice. Now, does that mean he shows up in Florida, does rallies with him? Does that mean he talks about him, at the White House and media appearances? Maybe. But if the DeSantis decide to get in, it's going to get pretty ugly on both sides.
All right. Now, Kimberly, the last thing I always like to ask you when we have these talks is what we need to keep our eye on in Florida politics over the next few days.
Yeah, well, anything with the session, any sort of signals about how the legislature is going to be working with the governor, any types of priorities. What was interesting is that House Speaker Perez really said he doesn't want to list out his priorities. He wants members to talk and to come to him and to tell him what they want to do. And so I think some of that sort of natural coming together is going to start to show pretty early on. I think we know the big problems in Florida are with affordability, and so we'll start to get some clarity on that. And so those I would say, the biggest developments are going to be, session 101, really watching to see where the policy areas are. And Ben Alberton, who's the Senate president, really wants to focus on rural Florida, saving the citrus industry. So that'll be huge as well. And I would say tonight, as well as President Trump's big joint address to Congress. And so anything that he says on tariffs will have a huge impact on our state as well. And so tuning in to hear what he says and any shout outs to Florida is what to keep an eye on.
All right. Politico reporter Kimberly Leonard, always appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us today here on Florida Live.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back into Florida Live. This is Senate President Ben Albritton speaking to reporters right now. Has been asked one question so far about permitless carry, basically asking or answering some questions about priorities for the upcoming legislative session that has begun, today being day one. Let's go ahead and listen in.
And let the thing work. It appears to be working.
Mr. President, what do you think about the governor promoting his wife as his successor?
Ma'am, with all due respect, this is my first day of session. As I'd mentioned before, that I've waited 7.5 years to do this. So my goal, Bill Galvano, when he was president, had a saying, I'm not a golfer, by the way. I don't know how many of you may be. I am not a golfer. But his saying was that play the hole you're on. And right now, I'm on a very important one. And my mission is to do a good job for the Florida Senate, to do a good job for Floridians. And as you saw me today in some of the highlights that I mentioned during my speech, we have a very important agenda that is about Floridians, and especially those that many times, or at least sometimes, may fall through the cracks. So, we'll see how all that works out. Right now, I'm certainly busy being Senate President.
The Speaker has announced that he was holding hearings to investigate a state report about insurance companies and profits and affiliate companies. You mentioned insurance in your address today. What do you make of what the Speaker is doing over there?
So a couple of things that I'd leave you with, and this is a recurring theme that you will see as we go through the budgeting process and well, largely in the budgeting process and in other places, continuous improvement. Transparency, accountability, outcome metrics, all of those types of things, right, which leads to a better government result. So what I would say is that we're going to watch very closely and see how that process works with the House. I have made some very direct statements about the insurance challenges that are going on here, and by those statements. We are certainly looking very closely ourselves and watching very closely. I've been interacting with regulators and folks that understand, what they're finding, what may or may not be uncovered, ... right? There's conspiracy theories that roll around. There's all kind of stuff that you have to figure out to make sure, again, you're doing the right thing for the right reason. Doing the right thing. Is doing the right thing making sure that insurance companies are following the letter of the contract they have with their insureds to be sure when there is a disaster or some kind of loss that is fulfilled? For sure, 100%. So we're going to be watching closely how the Speaker, pulls this together and how that process works and what it yields. I'll just leave it at that.
OIR has a bill, though, that would increase oversight of these affiliate companies and also provide a lot more information to the consumer. I think Senator Collins has that bill. Is that something you support?
So one of the things that's happened to me, being Senate President, in full transparency, is that, on day one of session, I think last week we had how many bills dumped into the system, many of which have not been referenced. My goal has been leading up to this day, get today right, and the structure and organization of the Senate. So senators are fully engaged. Senators are in positions to look out for their constituents. All of those things that matter. So I'm not aware of that bill. Happy to take a look at it and happy to talk with you about it at some point, but I'd hate to comment on the bill when I don't really know what's in it.
We're going to take a break here on Florida Live, but we'll be right back after this. Welcome back into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Wymer, and thanks for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon, live on Fox Local, Fox13News.com, and Fox35Orlando.com. This afternoon, we heard from NASA astronauts live from the International Space Station. This included two of the astronauts, the two astronauts who went up on Starliner, Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, and have been there on the ISS for about 9 months now, after expecting to be there for a little over a week. So Crew 10 launches March 12th. That will bring down Crew 9, which will be Butch Wilmore, Sonny Williams, Nick Hague as well. They will return after a several-day handover period with the new crew to talk about how things are going up there, give them the latest on the experiments and things that are going on, and then they will come back down to Earth. But we heard from them during a news conference earlier today. I want to play for you part of that, where we heard from those three astronauts ahead of their scheduled return to home in a little over a week.
Hi, I'm hoping you can hear me. For Butch and Sonny, what's it like to wake up one day in space and find yourself in the center of a political story? I'm referring to the comments a month ago made by President Trump and Elon Musk regarding your return.
Obviously, we've heard some of these different things that have been said. I can tell you at the outset, all of us have the utmost respect for Mr. Musk, and obviously respect and admiration for our President of the United States, Donald Trump. We appreciate them. We appreciate all that they do for us, for human spaceflight, for our nation. And we're thankful that they are in the positions they're in. The words they've said, politics, I mean, that's part of life. We understand that. And there's an important reason why we have a political system and the political system that we do have. And we're behind it 100%. We know what we've lived up here. We know the ins and outs and the specifics that they may not be privy to. And I'm sure that they have some issues that they are dealing with, information that they have that we are not privy to. So when I think about your question, that's part of life. We are on board with it. We support our nation leaders, and we're thankful for them.
Our next question comes from Emily with NBC News.
Hey there, thanks for taking my question. Butch and Sonny, your resilience and positivity really has shined through, but what has been the most challenging aspect about the changing timeline in space? And on the flip side, what will you miss most about space?
Hey, thanks, Emily, for that question, because immediately it brings to mind family and all the people on the ground who support us. So, you know, it's been a roller coaster for them, probably a little bit more so than for us. You know, we're here, we have a mission, we're just doing what we do every day, and, you know, every day is interesting because we're up in space and it's a lot of fun. So I think the hardest part is, you know, having the folks on the ground have to not know exactly when we're coming back. Know, of course, that we are coming back with Crew 9, but, you know, all of that uncertainty, I think, is probably the most difficult part. And, you know, it takes a little time just to have that conversation with them on a daily basis and say, hey, we're coming back before long, so, you know, don't make all those plans without me. You know, we'll be back before too long. And I think, you know, what are you going to miss about space? Everything about space. You know, this has been Butch and my third flight to the International Space Station. We helped put it together. We've been up here seeing it change throughout all these years, do a lot of science up here. I think just the fact that we're living up here in this very unique place gives you an amazing perspective, not only, you know, out the window, obviously, but also just on how to solve problems, use that spark of inspiration and that perspective when I leave. So I'm going to have to bottle it somehow.
Our next question is from Mark Strassman with CBS News.
Hey, everyone. Good to see all of you. Talk to all of you. Look forward to being back at home. I've got the two questions. First one is for Nick and Sonny. Through no fault or wish of your own, this mission became political, also political back in the U.S., is this drive to downsize government, federal agencies, including NASA. Are you all at all concerned, try that again, are you at all concerned that your NASA teammates could be distracted by that push to downsize? And then, Butch, you get the easier one. We're all the product of our life experiences and this extended business trip of yours certainly qualifies. What is your life lesson or takeaway from these 9 months in space?
So, Mark, I guess I'm going to start with the hard question as you defined it. You know, I appear a little bit insulated from a lot of what's going on down on the ground. But one thing we're not insulated from is how the operational team is functioning. And so on a daily basis, on a minute by minute basis, we're in contact with the ground. That team is supporting us, and it's not just in Houston; it's the entire NASA and international apparatus that's supporting us. And that support from the first day that I showed up here to today has been unwavering, and we're firing on all cylinders.
Well, in answer to your question, I can tell you honestly, my feeling on all of this goes back to my faith. It's bound in my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. He is working out his plan and his purposes for his glory throughout all of humanity, and how that plays into our lives is significant and important. And however that plays out, and I am content because I understand that. I understand that he's at work in all things. Some things are for the good. Go to Hebrews chapter 11. Some things look to us to be not so good, but it's all working out for his good for those that will believe. And that's the answer. So thanks for asking.
Our next question is from Gina Sinceri with ABC News.
This question is for Sunny. Sunny, I was talking to some kids who are talking about Gorby's tattoos, and they want to know what dogs you have now, and have they missed you, and how much are you looking forward to seeing them when you come home?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, it's probably hardest, getting back to the other question, for my dogs, although thank God they don't really know time that well. But yes, I have 2 Labrador Retrievers right now, Gunner and Rotor, who have been having boy time with my husband, and I think they'll be very happy for Mom to come home. So I'm excited to see my labs when I get back. And yes, these were Gorby's footprints.
You know those dogs are ready to welcome her home soon. Well, we're going to take a break here on Florida Live, but we'll be right back after this. Welcome back into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Wymer, and thanks for joining us. Some small devices are making some big waves at Major League Baseball spring training that's going on right now, not just here in Florida, but also across the country in Arizona. This device, though, is a game changer really for players of all ages with data that is designed to help keep athletes healthy. This is from Driveline Baseball. It's a data-driven baseball training company. They recently opened a new facility in Tampa. We have spoken with them before, but I had the chance to speak with Travis Fitta, who's the lead hitting trainer at Driveline Baseball, about these devices and what they can do and how they can really change athletes' approach to the game. We've heard a lot this spring about these pulse monitors. We've seen them it seems like on a lot of different players, more so than before. Can you talk to us about what those do and what they are?
Yeah. So basically, long story short, workload management, right? Like putting sensors on the elbow, especially for pitchers, is just basically monitoring workloads, making sure that guys are staying within healthy limits, showing you when you need to push it on certain days based on, recovery scores, health, things that are going on daily with your throwing, like knowing when to maximize your chance to go out and compete. So especially for starting pitchers, it's very important to understand where you're at probably in that window up to your start and your game day. So you can really monitor things on a daily basis. And I compare it a lot to, like wearing wearable technology for your health, whether it be Whoop, an Aura Ring, anything that you're doing to monitor your sleep, your workload, your stress. I mean, this is just the equivalent of that for pitchers now. So this equipment is really, really cool, and it's really, really valuable to be able to give these guys real-time feedback on a day-to-day basis about where they're at in the recovery aspect, where today is going to be a high-intensity day. Can I stay under certain workload management? Things like that, man. And I think, pitching has this really cool tool in Pulse, and they're able to use this daily to monitor their workloads. And I think you're seeing very much the same thing in hitting. While blast sensors have been around for a long time and they've been used for really good metrics like bat speed and attack angle and monitoring those things, like we are getting to the point now where we're utilizing blast as a way to monitor workloads for hitters too. Basically seeing like, hey, your bat speed's down today over your average of your last 10 sessions. So maybe it is really good to force in a recovery day for those guys, because at the end of the day, professional athlete, collegiate athlete, youth athlete, man, it's about when they get on the field, how do we maximize their ability to be on the field, be competitive and compete and do the things that they have to do. These are just tools, man, in the toolbox. And these are ways for coaches and athletes to have better and more engaged conversations about development. And honestly, it's very much, I could say like, hey, it's the future. I mean, it already currently is happening, but this is very much the future of where we're going. And it's about making sure that guys are staying healthy, but also very, very prepared to go out and do their job.
Yeah, and talk to me about why that data is so important now, because we know this is not the same game that was played years ago. People are throwing harder, they're doing, lifting more weights. And we also know the strain, the stress, the risk of injury we have seen go up as well. So how does this data help make sure someone's not overdoing it?
Yeah, I mean, man, it's a really good question. You could go 1,000 different ways on this, but I think it is important to note that like players are better than they ever have. That's just the evolution of humans. It's the evolution of sport. It's the scientific breakthroughs we make in training. Like guys are doing things at a very high level, and especially in an off season where everything that you do for a professional athlete gets tied to dollars. Like a jump in 1 mile an hour is huge. The ability to have increased command of fastball, any pitch that you throw is so valuable to the market and how you're going to be paid as an athlete. So you have to have safeguards in place. You have to have tools to measure. Pulse is that for pitchers. Blast can be that for hitters. It's about making sure that we, one, are keeping athletes safe, keeping them healthy, keeping them ready to compete, especially over the rigors of a long season that guys are going to play professionally. I mean, even the jump that some of these college guys who played last year to now this is their first year in professional baseball is going to be more than they had experienced in the past, even with the combination of summer ball and maybe some fall ball stuff they've done. This should be the most continuous action they've ever seen. And if we're not allowing them to have the space to be able to understand where they're at in their journey on a daily basis, we're really doing them a disservice. And I think that's what's really cool about not only the data you're pulling off these, but the fact that these are very wearable pieces of technology that anybody can use at any given time. You have no choice, man, but to have this really good objective feedback staring you in the face all day. So if you're saying today is going to be a light workload day and you make one throw that's over that workload management number, all of a sudden you get this objective feedback that tells you, hey, you need to calm down. You need to back down. It's the equivalent of having a really, really good coach in your pocket when the coach can't always be there. Having it paired with a really good program and a really good set of coaches that are there for your development is only going to make it even better. So you've seen professional baseball, we've seen collegiate baseball start to adopt these trends of taking care of athletes and making sure they're monitoring these workloads very appropriately. And I think this is just where we're going. And in the next few years, we may discover there's some new spaces. We may even figure out that maybe guys shouldn't start every fifth day. It could be every fourth day. I'm not advocating one way or another, but I think the more information we're able to collect and the more information we can get in front of really good, smart, passionate people that care about players and they care about the game, like, we're going to figure out a lot more in the next 5 years than we probably did in the last 15.
Why do you think we're seeing more players use these devices in this spring training, especially?
Yeah, I would probably attribute that lot to the growth that players have taken in the last couple of years about owning their own process and owning their own journey and careers, man. I think, like, we've looked for any way to basically turn over every single stone possible to make athletes better. And I think athletes have seen the success not only in the offseason, but have probably seen success themselves in season. And if they haven't, they've seen somebody else that has utilized this stuff and is speaking very highly of it. So I think the word to mouth is so important because you're talking about a very small niche community of athletes who talk, see each other every single day, have been teammates on multiple teams together. Like, hey, if this thing's working for you, then show me the way. Why is it something that I should use? And if you can prove those things, both from a player aspect, an organization aspect, a coach aspect, like, you are going to create buy-in to something that's going to directly show you on a daily basis. Like, these are the ways to get better. This is how we keep it under control. So there's very much a sell to this where you have to be able to provide tangible proof that these things are good for you. But then I think it just literally takes word of mouth and one guy going, hey, man, I used Pulse last year and it was the healthiest season that I've had. There's a lot that goes into that, but there's also the ability that I can control my workload every single day by getting objective feedback and actionable feedback from not only a piece of technology, but coaches that are in my corner. So, you know, I think those are one of the bigger reasons that you're seeing the uptick in usage from a lot of different athletes. But at the end of the day, I think it's always about, like, what is going to put me in a position to take care of my family, make the most money possible, and have the best career that I can have possible. And if it means that I've got to put a sensor on my elbow or put a sensor on my bat and really monitor that stuff, then that's just what I'm going to do to make sure I can do this for a high level for a very long time.
It's pretty fascinating technology. Really cool to see that data and what they're able to do with it. Knowledge is power, I think, in a lot of ways, and as we are certainly seeing that in the transformation of the game of baseball and trying to keep athletes healthier for longer. Well, thanks for joining us for today's Florida Live. We appreciate it. We will be back here tomorrow at 2 p.m. with another live hour as we look across the state and track news from our beautiful Sunshine State. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your
Florida Live starts now.
Well, good afternoon to you and welcome into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Wymer and thanks for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon live on Fox Local, Fox13News.com and Fox35Orlando.com. A busy day in news here across the state of Florida, beginning with the first day of the legislative session. We'll have more on that in a minute. Coming up later in the show, we heard from the Starliner astronauts, Butch Wilmore, Sonny Williams. Sonny, a graduate from the Florida Institute of Technology, speaking from space today, a live news conference from the ISS ahead of their return, their long-awaited return. They have definitely spent a lot longer in space than the 8 days they originally planned on. Going to be closer to 9-10 months by the time it's all said and done. But we heard from them today. We will bring that to you a little bit later in the show. At 2:20, we're going to speak with Kimberly Leonard from Politico, Florida, as they break down a busy day one in Tallahassee and talk about the repercussions, the fallout of some of the things we learned, and kind of looking ahead to this 60-day legislative session at the state capitol. An alligator attacking a kayaker. You're going to hear the 911 calls, and we will talk all about what we know about that situation with Fox 13's Nancy Gay in just a little bit. But first, Governor Ron DeSantis saying he wants to doge local governments in Florida as part of the push to eliminate property taxes. This was something that has been a topic of conversation. He mentioned it today in his State of the State address. As he outlined past successes, he outlined priorities for this upcoming session. But one part of his speech was a look at the next session in 2026 and the push to eliminate a property tax, which would require a proposal for a constitutional amendment. He talked about it not only during his speech, but also in his gaggle with reporters afterward. Here's what he said.
You buy a home, you pay off the mortgage, and yet you still have to write a check to the government every year just for the privilege of living on your own private property. Is the property yours, or are you just renting it from the government? And I know members of the legislature are studying the issue in anticipation of formulating a proposal to place on the 2026 ballot so that we can provide constitutional protections for Florida homeowners. Please know you have my support in this endeavor. Oh, and one other thing. Don't let anyone tell you we're going to seek to raise state taxes, because this body will not pass tax increases and this governor will not sign any tax increases. You got to get 60%. So I want to get as bold of relief for taxpayers as possible. We are going to be, the legislature is going to be studying different aspects of it. One of the things that I announced that we're looking for is give us a period of time, a year, year and a half, to be able to doge local governments. Realistically, we got to do this probably within the next 6 months to be able to shine some light on how that's. Now, I do have some authority under current statutes to get certain information about financial management. It's not probably what you would need to do a full doge. But I think what people see is these budgets have gone up dramatically, way, way in excess of the population increases. And look, some of it's inflation. I mean, we've seen that in Florida. We've had big population spike, big inflation, and even though our budget's been stable the last couple years, it's higher than it was 6 or 8 years ago, partially just because of that. But we need to show that, and then I think we're going to be at a great spot to say, okay, what can we get on the ballot? What can get past the legislature to get on the ballot? And then what can we marshal 60% of the electorate? As you know, we can't just cut property taxes through the state legislature because of the constitutional foundations of vesting that in local government. But the reality is twofold. One, you have people who are just living their lives. They bought a house 10 years ago, and now someone's telling them it's worth $1 million, and they got to pony up more money to the government. And our homestead exemption is not adequate. It is not adequate to protect taxpayers against that. So people are really getting pinched, and that's a huge, huge problem. And then you just have the overall philosophical point of, is it private property or not? Because if they can just keep taxing you when you own the home, own the land, free and clear, and they're just taxing you, then really you're paying rent to the government. And I think a lot of people think that that's wrong. So there will be something that we'll work on over these next many months, look to put it on the next legislative session, not this one. And realistically, it's going to go on 26 ballot anyways. So we're going to do that. And I know people want relief.
So we will keep a close eye on that. Obviously, you heard him say that this is not something that's going to be tackled this session, but lawmakers are beginning to kind of study this and figure out what all it would take to potentially put that on the ballot in 2026. The Senate Minority Leader also responded to the governor's State of the State address today. This is you're about to hear from a Democratic leader, the Senate Democratic leader, Jason Pizzo from Sunny Isles Beach near Hollywood. He fired back at the governor's list of priorities listed in his speech and also criticized Republican lawmakers for inaction over the years.
No Republican, and certainly no serious Democrat, sought to expand any of the policies or positions Republicans claimed were so rampant and so necessary to defeat. I have never pushed to install or even expand CRT, ESG, DEI, or wokeism. For none of these will lower your property insurance, your rent, nor will they result in your kids' GPAs getting higher or their test scores going higher. And like many of you, I've wondered how, with more than 30 years of majority control in the legislature and executive branches, how any of these issues were so insidious that they festered into such an instant concern, or rather, how did a generation of Republican predecessors allow us to get to this place? And more important, why did these academic issues so dominate our time and capacity instead of paying attention to failing infrastructure, plummeting test scores, spikes in homeowners insurance, and housing costs? How did we get to a place where the National Guard had to be and continues to be called in to fill critical staffing shortages at our state prison? How bold have we been with these real issues? The only rankings we've held steady on during the last 6 years are nearing the bottom in law enforcement salaries and near the top in insurance premiums and human trafficking. It's only in the last month, really, amidst an unnecessary public affray that the legislature has once again recaptured its autonomy. To be fair, the governor has been a good executive when performing executive functions. My own district has truly benefited and appreciated disaster responses after storms, direct assistance following the tragic loss of 98 lives in my district, and the shift from legislators having to beg for dollars to bring home each session to objective criteria applied to infrastructure project applications direct to state agencies. The mention of illegal immigration is not a new topic for the governor. It began with sanctuary cities in 2019 and urging the legislature to require E-Verify in 2020. And while many have talked tough on combating illegal immigration, here we are in 2025. And I, the Democratic Minority Leader, was the first to file the bill requiring E-Verify for all employers. Because you are not serious about curbing illegal immigration if you continue to cower to donors and not listen to our citizens. During this last special session, while we continue to add yet more duties upon our law enforcement community and dangerous activities, we did nothing to recognize their commitment. Less than 24 hours after I made mention of this on the Senate floor, the governor, and I applaud him for doing so, held a press conference announcing salary increases for state law enforcement. But for our career public servants, whether they're teachers, firefighters, or police officers, they deserve to be recognized and valued for their long-term career commitment, not sprinkled with bonus checks around election time. No hard-working Floridian, let's be honest, is asking for an equal outcome, just a fair shot at their vision, their family's vision of the American dream. Today, really, even in a light most favorable to what the governor may characterize as victories, the top priorities for Floridians are relatively unchanged, just as they were 6 years ago, and yet unaddressed. And many, like education, housing, and insurance, remain well within our legislative purview. My sons, who were in 6th grade 6 years ago, are now 18. One is heading to a Florida university this year and wants to be a law enforcement officer in Florida. The other shipped off last week to boot camp to be a United States Marine. In the last 6 years, if there are any indication of what's in store for our children's future, crafted by the whims of the executive branch and not by the wishes of our constituents who entrusted this legislature, I'm not confident our precious time and resources won't continue to be wasted on rhetoric. But this morning, Senate President Ben Albritton presented an agenda, a legislative agenda that is robust and real, to feed families, to foster economic growth, to protect our children, our homes, demand efficiencies with your tax dollars, and the right to course the years of neglect and indifference. Speaker Perez expressed much of the same. And so I pledge my absolute commitment that if we can focus on this agenda, there need not be an ideology or even an aisle that divides us.
One other note here is that at 2:30, so today is the first day of the legislative session, the first of 60 days of the legislative session. There are some committee meetings going on this afternoon. We do at 2:30 expect to hear from Senate President Ben Albritton, who is expected to speak. House Speaker Danny Perez expected to speak to reporters around 3:30 this afternoon. So other things that we are keeping an eye on as the afternoon goes on of day one in Tallahassee. We're going to take a break here on Florida Live, but we'll be right back after this.